There's been a lot of debate in this place about the extent to which public spending contributes to inflation. I'm wondering if the minister believes that all public spending contributes to inflation or just certain kinds.
The Honourable Minister.
I'd like to thank the member for his question. And one of the things that we have paid attention to a lot in the budget, in all of our budgets, is in making investments that increase Canada's economic capacity. And we believe that investments that do that actually can be anti-inflationary.
Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
So, for instance, does the minister believe that the GST rebate, which is targeted at low-income Canadians, was an inflationary spending item?
The Honourable Minister.
I'd like to start by talking about early learning and childcare, if I may, because for me that is the poster child of an investment that actually adds to Canada's economic capacity.
The Honourable Member.
So I'll take the minister to be saying that she doesn't believe investment in childcare is inflationary. Does she believe that doubling the GST rebate 2 times was an inflationary spend by government?
Honourable Minister.
What I'm going to say to the honourable member from Transcona is we need to be very careful in our budgets about a couple of things. We had an eye on a few things. One was being sure that we found a balance between fiscal responsibility, between our deficit and debt.
The Honourable Member. I'm doing the time thing, so I just want to make sure I'm okay with this. The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
So does the finance minister believe that the GST rebate was an inflationary spend or not?
Honourable Minister.
I believe that the GST rebate and the grocery rebate was spending that was necessary to help the people who needed it the most.
Honourable Member.
Does the minister believe that Pharmacare, which is a program that would lower the amount that Canadians spend on prescription drugs against the current amount that they spend, would be inflationary?
The Honourable Minister.
Whether spending is inflationary or not depends obviously on the macroeconomic conditions of the moment and on how the programs are designed and delivered.
Honourable Member.
How can lowering prices be inflationary?
The Honourable Minister.
Again, as I know the member for Transcona knows, everything depends on how programs are designed, and everything depends also on the macroeconomic conditions of the moment. Talk to someone from Japan. They are keen to have inflationary spending because they've been in a deflationary spiral for a long time.
The Honourable Member.
Over $30 billion in infrastructure spending risk being inflationary?
Honourable Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, the macroeconomic impact of any policy measure depends very much on the macroeconomic circumstance of the time. For us, compassion is important, fiscal responsibility.
Honourable Member.
Infrastructure investments are important, but they can also be inflationary. Does the minister recognize that infrastructure spending can be inflationary?
The Honourable Minister.
Sure. I absolutely recognize that very many different types of spending can be inflationary or not, depending on the overall macro environment in a country and in the world, and depending on how that spending is structured.
The Honourable Member.
Spending over $30 billion on the TMX pipeline. They've got a $15 billion growth fund. Does she share concern that the $30 billion being spent on a pipeline is going to bid up the cost of projects that the growth fund would invest in?
The Honourable Minister.
Here, the member for Transcona and I probably disagree. I am very glad that our government made the decision to get the TMX pipeline built. I think that it is very important for Canada's national sovereignty that we have a pipeline that goes to the West Coast and that the U.S. is not the only destination for our natural resources.
Honourable Member.
Is the nature of the disagreement on the fact that $30 billion on the TMX pipeline might bid up the cost of jobs for the growth fund?
The Honourable Minister.
I think when it comes to the TMX pipeline, probably we have many points of disagreement, although I suspect Rachel Notley and I have fewer points of disagreement on the TMX pipeline.
I'm concerned to know if she thinks that the spending on TMX may well bid up the cost of other large infrastructure projects like those foreseen for the growth fund.
The Honourable Minister.
I think the important point on TMX is the pipeline is very close to completion. We expect that it will be finished by the end of this year. This is an important contribution to Canada's economic sovereignty, and I think all members of
The Honourable Member.
How much does the government anticipate selling the TMX pipeline for?
The Honourable Minister.
Our government, once the pipeline is built, does not intend to be the long-term owner of the asset, and we're going to get a good value for Canadians. The other aspect that is important.
The Honourable Member.
Has the government canvassed prospective buyers?
The Honourable Minister.
The government is very aware of market interest in the pipeline.
The Honourable Member.
And how much does that market interest likely dictate they'll get for the pipeline?
Honourable Minister.
I want to point to one aspect, at least for me, when it comes to TMX, and that is Indigenous participation. That is something that we are working on very energetically with Indigenous groups.
Honourable Member.
The government is spending over double on the TMX pipeline what it's putting into the growth fund. How much does it expect to get for the pipeline?
Minister.
As I've said, Mr. Speaker, the government will get good value for Canadians from the pipeline. In the world, it is a very valuable, very rare asset, and as I said, contributes essentially to Canada's economic sovereignty.
And that the terms and conditions of the Stellantis deal are changing. Is that because the government did that initial deal on a handshake, or did it have a written agreement?
The Honourable Minister.
The initial conversations with Stellantis happened before the IRA was passed into law. I think it's very clear that the situation in the world has changed, and so naturally there are...
The Honourable Member.
Did the government have a written agreement with Stellantis before the IRA was passed into law?
Honourable Minister.
Obviously, the federal and provincial governments had agreements with Stellantis. It is also the case that the IRA has changed the playing field for the whole world. But the member opposite is right that the fact that this investment predates the IRA is an important factor.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
This in writing.
The Honourable Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, the member is quite right to point out, as I point out as well, that the fact that this agreement predates the IRA.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Was the agreement in writing?
The Honourable Minister.
The IRA has also changed the playing field in the world for investments of this kind.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Was the agreement in writing?
The Honourable Minister.
As I said, Mr. Chair.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Is the Volkswagen deal in writing?
The Honourable Minister.
I expect these rather childish games of gotcha to be played by the Conservative.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
I think there's anything childish at all when the government brags about securing investment for jobs for Canadians to ask whether it's written down or not. What I find childish is somebody refusing to say whether they have a written agreement or not.
Honourable Minister.
I think what's important for Canadians is to know the Volkswagen deal is a done deal. It has been disclosed. It is fully accounted for in our budget, and the details have been disclosed. I think Canadians do have a reasonable interest in what's happening with Stellantis.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Does done deal mean in writing?
The Honourable Minister.
Certainly. Now, when it comes to Stellantis, I think it's important for us to all be serious about this. This is an important investment.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
So is Stellantis a done deal?
The Honourable Minister.
As I think the member opposite knows, as I think Canadians know, we are negotiating right now with Stellantis, and we're negotiating
The
with
Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
In this budget, the government allocated another $50 million on top of the over $300 million it has already allocated to chasing money from the poor from the CERB program. I'm wondering how much is this government prepared to spend on chasing people that can't afford to repay their CERB debt?
5 minutes remaining. The Honourable Member, the Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, our government believes in compassion, and I think we have demonstrated that in budget after budget after budget. Our government also knows that Canadians want to know that there is fairness and program integrity.
Member.
Your reports and organizations that are currently working with vulnerable Canadians have said that the CRA is no longer offering the $5 or $10 a month repayment plans. Is this minister aware of that fact?
Well, Minister.
I'd like to talk about the importance of fairness, Mr. Chair. And fairness is important to vulnerable Canadians as well as to affluent Canadians. Vulnerable Canadians who played by the rules want to know that everyone else is playing by the rules too. And that's why we're finding a balance between integrity and compassion.
The honourable member.
How much money is the government spending to reclaim emergency wage subsidy dollars that were taken by companies that didn't need it?
The honourable minister.
The point, Mr. Chair, about the importance of integrity and fairness applies to all Canadians and to all of our programs.
To Canadians, but apparently not corporations. So I'll ask again, how much money is the government spending on reclaiming emergency wage subsidy dollars from companies that posted profits and paid dividends?
The honourable minister.
As I said, Mr. Chair, we absolutely understand the importance of program integrity. It really matters to Canadians. But I also want to point out, let's remember COVID was an unprecedented economic emergency. We took unprecedented...
The honourable member.
I don't know that Canadians think pretending to get money back from the poor and spending hundreds of millions of dollars to maintain the fiction is actually anything to do with fairness, or that it's a prudent financial decision. So again, how much is the government willing to spend to chase money it already knows it can't get back?
The honourable minister.
As I said, Mr. Chair, it's important for us to be compassionate, and that is one of the priorities of our government. But we also understand fairness matters to Canadians. And Canadians, for example, Canadians who received a payment in error and who have paid it back, those Canadians want to know those same rules apply to other Canadians.
The honourable member.
They might also like to know that it applies to multi-billion-dollar corporations that receive that money, haven't paid it back, and haven't been asked to pay it back. So how much is the government prepared to spend going after companies that got wage subsidy money and paid dividends to their shareholders?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Chair, we believe that integrity of all of our programs is important, and that is what we are pursuing, and we're pursuing it in a compassionate, reasonable way. But I want to remind people, eyes on the prize. And the important thing is, we needed to take emergency action during COVID.
The honourable member.
Earlier, the minister said in her exchange with the Conservative leader that platform documents represent a sacred trust. 7.5 years ago, this government promised to reform the employment insurance system, and it hasn't done it. Is that breaking a sacred trust with Canadians?
The honourable minister. 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, sorry. Our government absolutely understands the importance of the EI system. That's why during COVID, we contributed an additional $27 billion to the EI account to support EI, so EI could support Canadians in this.
The honourable member.
It wasn't a real contribution. They're already trying to take it back. They've assigned $25 billion of the CERBET to the EI account, which means that premium dollars are already going to go up just to pay back that debt, and that's not available for program improvements. So how is it that the government is planning to enhance employment insurance when they're already eating up the money that would be available to do that through a $25 billion debt assignment?
The honourable minister.
I'm afraid that that is simply an inaccurate explanation of what has happened with the EI account. EI supported Canadians in a significant way during COVID and in the aftermath, and that is why the government transferred $27 billion to the EI account to support EI. Now, whenever the country goes through an economic downturn, whether it was 2008 or the COVID recession, the EI account needs to move back into balance.
The honourable member, if you got a quickie.
Sure. Yeah. Pardon me. Now I need a minute. So I guess my final question, Mr. Speaker, in respect of that debt is, you know, we've been told by the Governor Bank of Canada he's going to keep raising interest rates until the unemployment rate goes up. So Canadians are in need of a well-functioning employment insurance system. When can they expect to get it?
The Honourable Minister.
I can't resist saying I'm not sure quickies are permitted in the House of Commons, Mr. Chair. Look, the EI system is very important. That's why we resisted pressure to lower contributions. That's why we're going to continue supporting this system that is so important for so many Canadians.